So I can begin the recording now. And welcome to all of you today. I really appreciate your being here. Our discussion topic for today is let's identify, develop, and support volunteer leaders. And where do we start on that? And I can't imagine that in this room of wonderful people, although we're virtual, that there isn't just a great amount of knowledge in this room. So that's one of the reasons we ask you to put your state beside your name so that people can know where to find you when they want to ask about some of the comments that you've made, or maybe even provide some assistance to a question with which you're dealing. So that's our topic for today. And I'm glad to see all of you. If there's any questions or problems, if you just want to drop your name and state in the chat if you aren't able to put it on, because sometimes with the phones and iPads it's a little difficult. If you just do that in chat, that'll help us. So thank you very much. And Dr. Mary, I believe you have the first question. Dr. Mary Clark is the co-lead for this event. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Deborah, and it's great to see everyone today on this Tuesday, 12th of March, and I can't believe that it's the 12th of March already. This year is flying on roller skates. So the first question I'm going to ask, and I've also put it in the chat for those who want to read along with me, is how do we know when a volunteer should step into leadership, and what identification mechanisms work for volunteer leaders in your states, in your regions? We're open for any and all input. We know that we have a mix of volunteers and staff here, which makes this a unique and wonderful opportunity. So we're waiting to hear your responses. Let me give you some additional food for thought until I see a hand go up. What tasks are suitable for a volunteer leader beyond yours, mine, and ours? Would anyone want to say what you do in your area? We have representation from coast to coast. Engaged volunteers, volunteer to lead volunteer activities. I see in the chat demonstrated ability to listen. Yes. I think some of the things that many volunteers do, and they're demonstrating leadership, but it might not be just identified by that name, is those volunteers, for instance, who are excellent in their tabling skills, and so much so that they engage the community in a way that makes AARP show up so powerfully. And I know just looking at different Facebooks of different states, I see that demonstrated just by seeing the pictures, and I know the engagement is powerful. So that's what would be called an easy entry. Linda, you want to tell me a little bit about what happens in Vermont?
I just wanted to add on to what you were going to say, what you were saying, Mary, is the fact that you can tell by how folks engage at the table. So if they're in their comfort zone of being able to have conversations about whatever the topic may be, or a wide range of topics, and you see that they can handle things well, that's a really good demonstration of leadership as far as a volunteer may go.
And just to add to that, Linda, too, when there's multiple volunteers, I think at a table, that is a powerful demonstration of co-leading, because when someone walks up to the table, if one volunteer doesn't have all the answers. Another volunteer might be able to just add on to the conversation. And those are really kind of non-threatening leadership roles for the volunteers who are standing there, because just by them being at the table, they're demonstrating that this is something that they enjoy doing. And obviously they're good at doing it because they're engaging the community. So are there any other examples of um, when, how you know, or when you know volunteers are stepping into leadership in your particular areas? Yes, Gloria, what's going on in Florida?
Um, Actually, based on how they volunteer, if they show initiative and if there's a project that we need some help on, if somebody raises their hand to help on that, maybe it's, maybe it's a little far distant than where they live, but they're willing to go that extra mile. It's people who show initiative and good sense in how they solve problems, and you can tell, just by their interest, basically, that they can go further, that they can learn more. Those that don't complain about the amount of training they may have to do. Those that don't complain about, I'm so sick of Zoom, that sort of thing. It's just kind of an all around point of view, a little, on the optimistic side, that you can problem solve and you can make things happen. That's my 3 cents worth goes of inflation.
Well, that's a wonderful 3 cents worth, and I think it's actually worth more than 3 cents. It's thank you, Mary Hartfield. I see my fellow Michigan / Georgia colleague.
Yes, hello. How is everyone? I think one is making sure that everyone has a sense of belonging when they're in their midst, he or she missed about it. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't matter what diverse background you are, because you're part of volunteering with AARP, you make sure everyone's engaged, make everyone feel like, yeah, this is good. Their ideals, you don't shoot people ideals down. When someone's ready for leadership, they listen more than what they talk in order to direct people. And then they don't like command, they ask, would you like to do? When they hear leader and they're able to identify leaders within the group, how ready also to help them lead the group. When you have a partner, so okay, I'll do this volunteer activity with you. That's why I had my partner back in Grand Rapids before I moved to Detroit. And, we would volunteer and lead something because, you're familiar with them. But I think also when someone else add on, we say, oh no, I don't like, me and her got it. No, come on in. How can we do this together? So I think a person, when they're ready for leadership, they bring the team mentality in and not the I mentality in.
You are absolutely right. And Mary, I'm going to come to you in just a moment. I just want to acknowledge some of these things in the chat because it's really active and it's really some great information. Somebody already mentioned the demonstrated ability to listen, but to also know the volunteer's background and know where they fit in, show the ability to assist and manage events while serving in a support role. Many ways you see somebody who's comfortable doing something in the background and they may just step forward. Good communication skills and organization, of course. Someone who's proactive in a number of areas, and where there's a need, they just step in and take the lead. And really important, and I think this is often overlooked, are those behind the scenes things, the setup crew, the cleanup crew, those people that help when we're on Zoom with the technology, the chat, all of that behind the scenes setting up, vital to the operation. So every little bit helps. Thanks, Annabelle. And Mary, I'll go to you and then we'll go back to the chat.
So I was just going to say it's also, I agree. It is how you get along with your fellow volunteers, because you have to work together as a team. And sometimes being a leader doesn't mean that you're always out there in front. Sometimes it means that you take a step back and you mentor somebody. and you make them feel that they have the tools that they need to do what it is, even if it's something as simple as tabling, or like we've had some new people taking on Zoom, and I literally sat and worked with them so that they would feel comfortable. And that, I think, is when you know they have the tools to work with, that they can take the next step into leadership.
Thank you. I think that you described kind of leading from behind, or leading from kind of behind the scenes is also a very strong strength and contribution. Um, Diane said, I'm often tempted to hand off leadership of something when someone shows initiative or offers to help, but I have to make sure that it's not so fast and so much that it feels like a disincentive to raising a hand to assist. Yes, that's really important too, because we can scare people off by kind of saying, "Oh, you can do this," and just giving it to them, and not giving them the support. And even if they can do it, they may not have volunteered to take a lead role because they are, maybe they retired from a lead role and they just want to, kind of come and help out and, kind of take a step back. So, Diane, that's a wonderful suggestion. And Kimba said, someone who demonstrates operational, strategic skill set and attitude. Attitude is everything. It really is. Thank you. Mary, did you have something else to add? Your hand is still up. Okay. Diane.
No, I just forgot to lower.
Okay, thank you. Diane, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, just to add to mine, because you said something that rang a little bit of a bell with me. I had a retired professor from a local college who came in and stated categorically, I do not want to teach anymore. Not quite a year in, she's like, oh, I can help with the teaching part. I can do volunteer training. So sometimes if you just give them enough time, they're like, you know what, I'm good at that. I want to do that again. So that kind of offsets that a little bit.
Yeah. Yes. And what she did was she did it at her own pace, basically.
Exactly.
So thank you for pointing that out. That is really important. Um, let me see. John said, I tend to watch for those who are voluntarily mentoring newer group members, those who see the need to and voluntarily mentor others. So it's organic. Things happen organically because people are observing and they see where they fit in, and it's something that's natural and easy for them. They just step up and step in. Linda?
Yeah, I was just going to add one thing. We had a volunteer. I was just remembering, somebody ticked a memory in my head, but we had a volunteer that always raised her hand. Yes, I'd be more than happy to help with that. But that was just the kind of thing that she did. And it wasn't until I actually sat down and talked with her and said, you've been doing such a great job raising your hand and volunteering. Is this something you enjoy? And she said, actually, no. I'm just somebody that likes to help. And I thought, it's not going to be a good fit if that's the case, but it wouldn't have happened because she was such a doer without, having those kinds of conversations, because she would have been a short timer, even more so because of that, and get burned out at the same time. So.
Yeah. But isn't that a wonderful skill to see take place as someone who just steps up? And it is really important to ask somebody, is that what you enjoy doing? Because that did kind of prevent them from being overly used, and from them quiet quitting, as we know people do. If they're not getting the experience they want, they may leave. And although she could do all of those things, and she was doing all those things, was that really enhancing her volunteer experience as she had wanted it to be? And the answer was no, what Linda found out. So thank you for sharing that. Mary?
Yeah, I was just thinking as I was looking at Deborah, that sometimes a good leader and volunteer where you don't know whether they're staff or volunteer, because they're so committed to doing what they do and they just do it. Because when I went to the conference last year, I always thought Deborah was a staff member, but she's a volunteer. But you can't tell the difference because she's doing it like it was something she was paid to do. So she has a passion for it, and she shows that every time when she shows up at the meeting, and you know that she's going to take care of business. So that's what you're looking for in a leader, and Deborah is a good example of that.
I concur and I agree. Thank you for
Oh,
sharing that, Mary.
yeah, and I've got to say thank you, Mary, for even saying that. It was amazing when you came up to me in our conference face to face. We had never seen each other before, had been working together for almost 2 years, and then when we met, and she tells me, "But you're staff." It's like, no, my husband says I should be, but I'm not. But, as some of the people have already said here, I started out wanting to do just something really very simple. Did not want to do anything big. I'd been a manager all my life, didn't want to do any of those things, just wanted to sit behind a table. And so here I am, I'm behind a table, but it's a little bigger now. So.
Thanks, Deborah. I want to go back to the chat because
Mhm. Christopher has something in
yeah,
here that's interesting.
and he said, I think that one of the things we need to focus on, and he's trying to do that, is to build a team, realizing that some of those good leaders don't want to be the leaders. They want to participate and meeting people where they are. Thank you, Christopher, for pointing that out. And I know that sometimes focusing on the team, you can even help people to identify roles that they enjoy co-leading. And, of course, that's just like leading. But when you have a partner in the process, it makes it a little less heavy and a little less intense, and it's still leadership. And I know that's one of the things that I enjoy doing with my colleagues, which is why I'm enjoying this experience co-leading 360 with Deborah, because it's not a heavy lift. And Christopher, let me hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a conversation with one of our volunteer leaders here about stepping into a leadership role and helping to develop and build everything and working. And one of the first things she asked me was, do you want a partner? Do you want somebody to lead? Do you want somebody to serve in your support? And she wanted me to be very clear because she could be a very, very strong, like she could be staff taking over, doing something like that. But she has a full-time job, and she wanted to be clear that she can do these certain roles, but she needs to make sure that she's not doing all these roles. And I think the biggest focus is not trying to give too much to some of these people who want to take it on. Because I've been in organizations myself as a volunteer where you start volunteering and next thing you know, you're being handed more things, and that leads to burnout, and not wanting to lead to that burnout, but to get her to this part. And especially as they're coming in new and developing, and just keep continuing with those. So thank you.
Thank you. Antoine, I see you there. What's going on in California?
Hey, Mary and everybody. Yeah, I wasn't gonna. I kind of put something in the chat, but earlier, but a couple of things came to mind too, because out here we have position descriptions for all of our different volunteer roles and positions. So, kind of looking for people to tick some of those boxes in that position description a little bit, and that's not the end all be all, of course, because it just isn't. We don't want somebody to we don't want to be checking boxes for folks, but there are, like everyone said, some different skill sets and things that we kind of keep an eye for. But I'll speak for myself and say, as a staff person, one of the things I have to try to make sure I do, and a couple people mentioned, even Christopher before me, is keeping my eyes open, because we can get really caught up in the work, right? So we have numbers that we got to make sure we meet. We got you know, the venue, the partner, what's this, what's that, who's on first, all of that stuff that's going on. And so it's important for us to make sure that we're intentionally kind of keeping that eye open for those individuals that either are literally saying, I would like to lead, and then other people who are quietly leading, that we want to try to help bring to the front as comfortable as they would like to be, right? But then another area that I know I look at as well is I do look for those folks who are critical. They have that critical eye. They, you know, they may have some suggestions after every event, not necessarily complaints, but you know, gentle nudges that, hey, we need to do this, we need to do that, and I kind of approach them as, hey, can you help us? Can you be a lead in terms of, you know, when an event is over, you know, making sure we really think about the event overall. You know, what were the things that went well? How can we do things better? So it's not somebody that's looked at as a complainer, but somebody who also has ideas and suggestions about how can we make this event more impactful for people. So I kind of flip that a little bit, so that the team doesn't ostracize the person, but also they feel like I'm not always complaining and no one's listening. You know, some of those things come to light and are activated, and others, you know, may not be. So just a couple of other things too.
And I think that's a really great point that you have highlighted, Antoine, is we may have volunteers who, for whatever reason, their communication style comes across critically, but they are really doing you a favor by being eyes and ears in different parts of an event. And that's also an opportunity to help that volunteer maybe kind of smooth off some of those rough edges in that communication, that critical communication style, and help them to grow and lead from a different perspective. So really appreciate how you pointed out doing that. Deborah, let me just go to the chat and cover these things, and then I'll turn it over to you. Annabelle says, it sounds like someone who was shy but interested and maybe didn't know what their niche is. And that was referring to something that we referred to earlier. And personal issues and constraints sometimes will either impact or limit how a person wants to show up in their leadership role. And it's an opportunity to develop those. And I look forward to more time as my mother's health improves. So you never know what's going on behind the scenes for a volunteer, and they may be showing up as much as they can. And that's helping them to maybe minimize some stress that's going on at home, and also, you know, contributing to the greater good. So we're all kind of juggling multiple things. And I know I was a caregiver when I started my volunteer role, and it was good for me because I felt like I was doing something for the community, even though I was a little bit tired. And the last thing that Kimba said is, don't be afraid to have co-leaders to prevent burnout. Team leads can be beneficial to the team and the leaders. So yes, I concur. Thank you all. Deborah?
Okay, and thank you, Dr. Mary, and thank you to those who have spoken so far, but we're only part of the way through. And for one of these things that I wanted to do, and is to show you something that you may have already seen, but wanted you to know that it's available. And this is from New Hampshire. And we talk about recruiting all the time and getting people ready to volunteer. And I know every state has their own way, and I'm going to make this available for you in attached to the videos when I make those available. I'll put them in the chatter. But they've put on here, this is a flyer to hand out to people to let them know the opportunities that they've got, how to connect. And then they talk specifically about the volunteer types or the the services that for which they need help. And then they move to a bit.ly connection that takes them to a website, and you can also get to it with this QR code that then allows the person to see a volunteer in action in those particular areas. So I just thought this was such a neat piece that it's all on one piece of paper, and either with the QR code or using a URL, you can see the videos that show how people are working, what they want people to do. And then at the end of it, if they find something they like, if that person does, there is a application that asks what they're interested in and talks about that. So there's wonderful help for people who are looking for additional volunteers and trying to make their volunteer recruitment helpful and complete. Just wanted you to see that. One of the questions, and John, you did mention this a while ago, one of the questions we came up with is how much time or dollars, and this is not just for staff, it's for volunteers as well on the SCOL, do you spend when you're recruiting volunteer leaders or mentoring volunteers? What do you do in that respect? Does anybody have a suggestion, comment, some experience that they'd like to share? John, you were the person who brought up mentoring a while ago. Is there something you could share about your experience in that?
Well, most of my experience has not been with AARP because I'm a relatively new volunteer myself. So I was just referring to in my professional life, you know, it's not always the person who raises their hand, and some of those people, they just want to be in a position of power. And so I always really spent time looking out at what my group was doing and noticing the people that were willing to lead other people without, you know, getting the name badges and the titles and all of that kind of stuff. And then approaching them one-on-one and saying, how would you feel about being lead on this project? And kind of ease them into it. Because those always seemed like the people who knew they could do it, but they're uncomfortable jumping up in front of everybody and saying, look at me, I want to be the team manager. So yeah, I would spend time doing that. And I would also, depending, not so much later in my career when there were a lot more people under me, but I would try on a monthly basis to make sure I was touching base individually with team members and seeing how they're doing and asking them what they were feeling about how the group was working. And you know, usually it's those same people that I saw helping others out one-on-one and mentoring are the ones who had good, positive, constructive suggestions. So so you can't, you know, spend your entire allotted time trying to develop people, but you do have to, as someone said earlier, make sure that you don't get so focused on what you're trying to accomplish every day that you can't see the long-term picture. I had a mentor early in my business life, and at my first performance review with him, he said, the first thing he said in my performance review is, I have one question I have to ask you before we even get started. And I said, what's that? He goes, how many minutes every day do you spend looking out your window? I was like, why is he asking me this? Because he wanted to know, did I stop and did I just gaze out at the street and try to think about things and give my time give myself time to go through that process, or was I just answering the next email and doing the next thing and doing the next thing?
Mhm.
So I think that is good advice. Spend at least 15 minutes to a half hour every day looking out the window.
There you go. All right. Thank you, John. And now, Mary, I think you've raised your hand again, huh?
Yeah, I was thinking back to when worked with new volunteers back when I was in Grand Rapids. And what really helped me was you may want to jump on, and part of that was during the pandemic and coming off it. We started meeting in person before we were meeting in person, that I figuring out what kind of learner are they. You know, some people learn by talking and some people learn by visual. I'm kind of both. So learning that helped me spend less time with that person because I realized, okay, they're a visual learner. So I would also give them the document, give them time to review it, mark down your questions when we were leading something, and came back and then, oh, what are these questions? We met on Zoom. So that really helped when I knew what kind of learning. Some people are where you just give it to them and they can run with it, but yet they may be that type of person, but if they don't know the way we do it at AARP is the thing that you got to work with them. So I think the time depends on the person that you're mentoring, helping to lead and volunteer, what kind of learn they are, how do they receive information, how they learn. So all of that is some things that have that initial conversation with them. Some of you can find out, some you may have to ask the question.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much, Mary, because you hit on more things that, as John was saying, we've got to talk to people to find out what it is they really want to do and how we can make the volunteer journey their best experience. I mean, that's our big thing here, is trying to make sure that every volunteer understands that they are valued and important to the organization and to the work of the organization. Linda, you mentioned also that you talked to people. That was how you found out. How much time? I mean, John was talking about from a business perspective, doing it on a once a month basis, but that may not be reasonable for us. Is there some time frame that makes sense that you experienced?
That's a really great question, Deborah. And I think people have different levels of engagement and willingness to step forward. That it takes knowing the individual, as you were saying. If you've got a once a month meeting, with a committee that you're working with, or you see online, even, through meetings like this, we can identify folks that are not afraid to share their ideas, and you can probably peg them as being leaders, which is a once a month sort of thing. The ideas they have, the ways they understand AARP. And I think that might be another aspect, is there's a lot of education about all of the things that AARP does. It's not just a small little thing, and it can be overwhelming. So you need to be careful with how you indoctrinate. But we've got a meeting coming up next week with, not next week, next month, actually, with volunteers. And, having volunteer leaders there to tell their stories. And sometimes stories like that help you to understand a little bit more, both about them as well as folks that can relate to that as a training mechanism. So I'm not really answering your question, Deborah. I realize that, but giving fodder for thought as far as all of those sorts of things.
Well, and that's why we're here. It's, we may not answer every question, but you will get something to think about that then becomes handy when we get to the next issue, So who is it? It's Mary. Mary, would you like to explain what you put in chat here? just give us a few highlights?
Well, I've had a number of co-leads, but I had one co-lead, a great person, just a dynamite person that she could lead an activity, but if she had to speak at the meeting or if she had to speak in public, she hated it. She would shy away. And I said, that's okay. I'll be the spokesperson. And I just included her in everything, but she was just so great. So you have to take what a person is comfortable doing. Some people will actually can manage an activity or an event really, really well, but they don't want to do the aspect of maybe talking in public, like talking to a group.
Right.
They're great at one-on-one, but they don't want to talk to a very large group. So I think you have to take those things into consideration.
And I think, if
yeah, go
Deborah,
on,
if I
Mary.
could just chime in, I think
Mhm.
what Mary has so skillfully expressed in this example is allowing the volunteer to do what they feel they're good at. And you know, we've had other examples of that demonstrated today where the professor didn't want to teach, but then the professor, when she felt comfortable, you know, stepped up and said, well, I can facilitate this, or I can do that training. And so two of my favorite things to do with volunteer teams are to find out what they are good at and what they enjoy. And then the flip side of that coin is, what things don't you want to, what things do you prefer not to do? So we can, you know, eliminate that as being a task that you don't have to do unless it's, you know, absolutely crucial. But if you let somebody do what their gifts are and what their talents are, they'll show up every time.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you, Mary. Okay. Well, we do have one more comment, it looks like, in the chat, and I'm going to ask, I know Diane has spoken, but would you like to elaborate just a bit on what you put in the chat, please? Diane?
Okay. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, I guess. Whatever that we've got going on there, I cheat. Don't tell anyone. I use a Google Sheets for people to sign up on because it's just easier. But there's a column for shadow, right? So if you're a volunteer, you don't have to sign up to be responsible for picking up the stuff for the table or running the movies for grown-ups. Oh no, I've been busted. I see more staff coming on, Kathy Kynes. So you don't have to
That's
sign
okay. Will can handle that.
anything. But
We'll
if you're
lose the recording. Okay.
you're gonna edit me out, right?
Right.
To be responsible for anything. But if you want to know how movies for grown-ups work, or if you want to know how to do a good tabling exercise, or if you want to go to the Veterans Tiny House Project and see how commissary day works, whatever it is, you can go and just follow along with other volunteers and they can tell you what to do, but you're not in charge. And you can say, oh, I love this, or oh, I'm not doing this one ever again. And that gives them the opportunity to kind of feel their way through. And often I'm at some of these things too, so I can also help figure out, oh, that's going to be perfect for Aquila, or oh no, Miss Mary Jo should never do that again. You know, that kind of, it helps on both sides.
You are absolutely correct. Thank you so much. And Mary, you know, Dr. Mary, you talk quite a bit about storytelling, and I think Mary was mentioning, and people are mentioning storytelling. Is there something you'd like to share on that?
Well, what I always think that all of us do as volunteers and as staff, we do what we do very well, and we just keep doing it very well. We don't uplift, we don't amplify, we don't showcase, we don't spotlight those great talents, those great skills, that great impact that we're having on our community. So just some of the stories that have been reflected today, the little short snippets, sometimes reflecting that back to a volunteer and letting them know that you saw them and you acknowledged what they did. That's one way to tell a story. I see many of you do that on your Facebook pages. All of those things go a long way to not only amplify the work that's being done in the community, but some volunteers like that little hint of thanks or that hint of acknowledgement. And those things, although they are what we've actually done, those are just part of the AARP story, the small story, and put all those together. It's a wonderful tapestry or a wonderful quilt of stories that we as volunteers and staff are doing for our community. So thank you, Deborah. Can I ask one thing of everybody?
Yes.
Either using those of you that are on camera and those of you that are off camera, if you want to just use your reaction button. And if you're a volunteer, can you just raise your hand? I want to see how many volunteers we have here. And you can go to your reaction button. Okay. 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 That's a good amount of volunteers. And now staff, we want you to raise your hands too. Everybody put your hands down so we can let staff. This is an exercise too, kind of a mental exercise.
It's a Zoom test.
Nobody's falling asleep. So staff members, either those of you on camera or electronically, raise your hand. Let's see how many staff members are here today. Isn't that a wonderful thing? It just makes my heart smile because it's like, I don't want to say half and half, but it's a good mix of everybody. And that's what this conversation is all about, bringing everybody together, sharing these ideas. And as Mary indicated earlier, Mary Hartfield, because it seems like a Mary party today. What Mary's here today. What Mary Hartfield said earlier was, sometimes you can't tell the staff from the volunteers. And in the ideal AARP world, we want our staff partners to let us take the load off of them. And if we look like a staff member to the community, that's good and fine. We know our lane. So if somebody asks us something that's not staff related, we'll certainly bring it to you. But we want you to feel comfortable that as volunteers, we're representing not only the organization, but all of the interest of our staff partners as well. So thank you, staff partners, for being here and sharing your wisdom and experiences and letting us as volunteers know that you see us and you acknowledge what we do. And thank you, my volunteer colleagues, for all that you're doing in your communities and for the enterprise, because we know that we've heard many times that volunteers are kind of the heartbeat or a main component of AARP that makes it work. And I know I'm grateful to have this opportunity to show up in a way that makes me feel comfortable, that doesn't make me feel stressed, and I get to contribute to the best of my abilities. So Deborah, I'm going to turn it back over to you for the end of our meeting today.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Mary, and thank you to everyone who has come today and who's shared information. And if you've got additional ideas or materials to share, we hope you send those to me and we'll put them out on the chatter group so that everybody has access to it. I'm going to put that one-page connection for volunteer thing out, as well as the video tomorrow. That'll be available. And I wanted you to know that on the April 9th meeting, because we're always the second Tuesday of the month, it is going to be the Anderson Award is Great. And what else is there for volunteers? And we're going to have 2 guests then. So I expect that that will be another one of our lively and informative meetings. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Dr. Mary, for being co-lead. Thank you, staff, for sitting in and helping us out. And I trust that everyone will have a wonderful day and just proceed on with the rest of their week. Yes.
Thank you all for coming. Have a great rest of the day.
Right.
best run meeting at AARP. Starts at 5 after, ends at 10 of. Gotta love it.